The desert don't forgive mistakes. One wrong turn, one spooked horse, and a man can vanish without a trace, swallowed whole by the dust and silence. That's how Jace, barely 22 and still wearing the pride of youth like a badge, found himself riding alone where no cowboy from Dustwood dared to go, Apache country. The sun beat down like a hammer, unrelenting, merciless. Sweat stung Jace's eyes as he guided his bay mare, Ember, across the ridges. He wasn't supposed to be here, not this far, not this alone. The cattle drive had scattered in a thunderstorm 2 days back, and when the dust cleared, he was riding blind with nothing but stubborn pride to keep him going. Jace had grown up under the hard hand of his father, Wade, a man of stone, forged by grief. Wade never raised his voice, never raised his hand either, but silence can bruise deeper than fists. It left Jace always reaching, always trying to prove he was more than the quiet disappointment in his father's eyes. And so, when he lost his way, turning back wasn't an option. Not for Jace. Not when men in Dustwood already called him green. The land grew stranger with each mile. Red mesas rose like ancient guardians, and canyons split the earth like scars. Every shadow looked like a trick, every rustle in the brush like an ambush waiting. Ember felt it too. Her ears twitched, her body tense. She knew better than her rider. Out here, the Apaches were said to appear and vanish like smoke. By mid-afternoon, thirst clawed at Jace's throat. His canteen was near empty, his lips cracked. Ember's breath came hard, her flanks dark with sweat. That's when he spotted it, a ribbon of green cutting through the valley below, cottonwoods and willows. Water. Relief surged through him, but caution tempered it. Water meant life. Water also meant eyes watching. Still, without it, neither he nor Ember would see another dawn. He led her down a narrow deer trail, rocks tumbling under her hooves. The air cooled in the canyon's shade, but his nerves tightened. He couldn't shake the prickling at the back of his neck, like ghosts trailing close. The spring was small but clear, tucked against the canyon wall. Ember plunged her nose into the pool, drinking deep. Jace crouched, scooping the cold water into his hands, the taste of earth and stone sweeter than any whiskey. But then he froze. Hoofprints. Fresh. Unshod ponies. Not cattle. Apache. His gut tightened. He should have pulled Ember away right then, ridden back the way he came. But thirst and fatigue pinned him to the spot. He drank again, slower, his hand never straying far from the colt at his hip. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and threatening. Jace lifted his eyes to the horizon. Dark clouds swelled in the west, heavy with rain and lightning. A storm was coming, one that could wash a man off the earth in minutes. He scanned the canyon walls, desperate for shelter. That's when he spotted a slit in the rock, half hidden by thorny mesquite. A cave. Shoving through the thorns, he pulled Ember inside just as the sky split open. Rain fell in sheets, pounding like fists. Lightning lit the cave in harsh flashes, thunder shook the earth. Jace steadied Ember with a hand, whispering low, fighting his own fear. The cave stretched deep, sandy floor dry beneath their boots. For a breath, Jace thought he might have outrun both storm and shadow. But then lightning blazed again, and his heart stilled. He wasn't alone. Across the cavern, pressed against the wall, stood a figure draped in buckskin. Dark hair hung loose over her shoulders, and in her hand gleamed the edge of a knife. Her eyes, sharp, defiant, unyielding, locked onto his. Apache. A woman. The storm outside roared like judgment. Inside, silence cracked like a drawn bowstring. Jace's hand hovered over his colt, his breath caught between fight and flight. The girl's voice sliced through the thunder, accented but clear. "You leave. This is my place." And in that moment, the storm outside felt tame compared to the storm rising inside that cave. The cave was no bigger than a barn loft, but it felt tighter than a coffin with two souls inside it. On one side, Jace stood stiff, hand grazing the grip of his Colt. On the other, half swallowed by shadows, the Apache woman watched him like a cornered bobcat. Her eyes glinted in the lightning flashes, dark, fiery, and unyielding. She couldn't have been more than 20, but there was nothing young about her stare. It was seasoned, distrustful, the gaze of someone who had seen too much betrayal. Her knife gleamed steady in her hand, the storm's crackle bouncing off its edge. "You leave. This cave is mine," she said again, her voice edged with bitterness. Jace shifted, rainwater dripping from his hat brim. "Can't do that, ma'am. Storm will tear me and my horse to pieces. You stay on your side, I'll stay on mine." Her laugh was short, sharp, humorless. "White man's promise, worth less than dust." The words stung harder than he expected. Jace raised his palms, showing he meant no harm. "I ain't here looking for trouble. Just trying to live through the night. Same as you." For a moment, the only sound was the storm howling outside, wind and rain lashing the canyon like a furious spirit. Ember snorted uneasily, hooves scraping against the stone. The mare's fear was enough to steady Jace. His father once told him, "Trust your horse more than your own eyes." The woman didn't lower her knife, but her grip eased. She tilted her head, studying him like she was measuring his worth. "Your name?" "Jace," he said after a beat. "From Dustwood." Her mouth twisted. "Dustwood killed my cousin. Called him thief, hung him without proof." The accusation struck him like a blow. He remembered the talk in town, a young Apache swinging from a noose, folks saying justice had been served. He'd been uneasy about it then. Hearing her spit the story into the storm made the guilt heavier. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She echoed the word like it was foreign on her tongue. White men always say sorry, after. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by thunder rolling through the canyon. Jace took a slow breath, trying not to stare, but he couldn't help noticing the way she held her ribs protectively. She was hurt. "You're wounded," he said. "Not your concern," she snapped. Jace reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a tin of jerky and a small can of peaches, his last sweet ration. He set them on the ground between them. "Storm's long. Share it, if you want." Her suspicion lingered, but hunger won. She reached forward, snatching a piece of peach with fingers both calloused and elegant. She ate slow, savoring the sweetness, eyes never leaving him. "What's your name?" Jace asked. She hesitated. "White name's Sarah. But my true name is Lark." "Lark," he repeated, the word fitting her sharper than Sarah ever could. Lightning lit the cave once more, showing her face fully, strong cheekbones, wild hair plastered from rain, lips pressed into a defiant line. Yet in her eyes there was more than anger. There was hurt, loneliness, something Jace recognized in himself. "Why are you alone out here?" he asked softly. She stiffened. "Not alone by choice. My people gave me to Flint's clan. A marriage to bring peace. But I gave him a daughter, not the son he wanted. Dove died before her first moon. They called me cursed. Beat me. Left me in the desert to die." The words cut sharper than her knife. Jace swallowed hard. He thought of his father's silence, of growing up unwanted, never enough. Different stories, same brand of pain. "That ain't right," he said, heat in his voice. "A man ought to protect his wife, not." "You know nothing, Jace," she interrupted, her tone bitter. "Your people break promises. My people do the same. World is cruel everywhere." She shivered then, pulling her doeskin tighter. The storm had turned the night bitter cold. Without thinking, Jace slid his blanket across the floor toward her. "You'll freeze. Take it." She eyed it like it might hide a snake. "What do you want for it?" "Nothing. Just, it's cold." Long moments passed before she finally snatched it up, wrapping it around her shoulders. This changes nothing. If you come closer, I cut you. Jace gave a tired smile. Fair enough. The storm raged on, but inside the cave, a fragile truce had been struck. Two strangers, divided by blood and history, forced by thunder and rain to sit in the same dark. And as the coyotes howled their lonely songs beyond the canyon, Jace knew this night would not be forgotten. The storm still pounded outside, but inside the cave the silence between them grew heavier than the thunder. Jace leaned against the cold rock, trying to keep his eyes open, while embers shifted restlessly behind him. Across the cave, wrapped in his blanket, the Apache woman sat rigid, knife never far from her hand. Her name, Lark, echoed in his mind. It suited her better than the English name she had tossed out like an insult. There was something wild in her, something untamed and bruised but still standing. After a long while, Jace spoke low, careful not to spook her. You're hurt bad. Anyone can see it. Her dark eyes narrowed. I said it is not your concern. You favor your side every time you move, he pressed gently. I've seen cattle with busted ribs, the way they breathe shallow. Same with you. She flinched, not from his words but from shifting her body too quickly. Her hand went to her ribs. For the first time, the fierceness in her face cracked, just a flicker of pain. Jace dug into his saddlebag, pulling out a small roll of bandage, frayed but clean. He set it on the ground between them. My ma taught me a bit about patching folks up. Won't fix everything, but it helps. Her jaw clenched. White man's medicine makes the mind weak. Spirits turn away. Then don't take the laudanum, Jace said. Just let me wrap it. Spirits won't mind you breathing easier. For a moment, she stared at him like she was weighing more than bandages. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, she pulled the blanket tighter and lifted the edge of her doeskin dress just enough. The sight made Jace's gut twist. Her side was a canvas of purples, blacks, and yellows, bruises that told stories no woman should carry. Hell, he whispered. Her gaze hardened. Not hell. Thorn Clan. The name hung like smoke. She spoke flat, without tears. They said I was cursed. My baby girl, Dove, too weak to live. Flint wanted a son. When she died, he and his mother called me poison. They used fists, old prayers, and when nothing changed, they left me in the desert for the spirits to judge. The words burned like whiskey going down. Jace tightened the bandage carefully, his hand steady but his chest on fire. A man who lays hands on a woman ain't no man at all. Your people say the same, she muttered bitterly. But men still do it. Words are easy. He tied the bandage off, sat back. You're still breathing. That means they didn't break you. Her eyes, shadowed with sorrow, flicked up at him. You think surviving is living? Shame follows like a wolf. Worse than death. Jace felt a sting of truth in her words. He thought of his father, Wade, whose silence had been a punishment all its own. The shame of never measuring up still gnawed at him. I know shame, he admitted. It eats at a man. But maybe carrying it together makes it lighter. Lark studied him in the dim flicker of lightning. For a moment, the storm lit her face, scarred by loss but stubbornly alive. You're strange, Jace from Dustwood. Too soft-hearted. Soft hearts break fast. Maybe, he said, managing a faint smile. But soft hearts also see more. She wrapped the blanket around her again, gaze drifting toward the cave's mouth where rain still sheeted down. The hardness in her expression eased, if only slightly. They ate in silence, sharing jerky and the last of the peaches. Outside, coyotes howled their eerie song, answered by others across the ridges. They sing for the rain, Lark said softly, almost to herself. Always sounded lonely to me, Jace replied. Everything is lonely, Jace. You should know that by now. Her words lingered long after the storm began to ease. Two strangers, each marked by shame and loss, sitting on opposite sides of a cave. The world outside would call them enemies. But for one fragile night, with thunder shaking the earth and bruises binding them both, they were something else entirely, survivors, bound by scars. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the desert washed raw and shining. The air smelled of wet sage and earth, fresh but heavy, like a wound that hadn't yet healed. Water dripped from the canyon walls, tiny rivulets carving paths through the sand. Jace stirred awake against the rock wall, stiff from the cold. Ember shook her mane and stamped her hooves, restless for the open trail. Across the cave, Lark sat awake already, knife in her lap, blanket still draped around her shoulders. Her dark eyes were steady, watchful, as though she hadn't closed them once through the night. "You don't sleep much," Jace muttered, rubbing the grit from his eyes. "Sleep is for those who feel safe," she answered, her tone clipped but not cruel. Jace pulled himself to his feet and stretched, sore muscles protesting. "Storm's gone. Time to ride." Her chin lifted sharply. "I walk." He frowned. "You're hurt, Lark. Riding will spare you." "I ride no white man's horse," she said flatly. "Feet know the earth. Horse forgets." Jace didn't argue. He'd learned last night she didn't bend easy. He tightened Ember's cinch and slung his saddlebag over his shoulder. "Fine then. But you'll lead. I reckon you know this land better than me." She said nothing, just rose and stepped out of the cave, moving with a quiet grace that surprised him given her injuries. Her feet found paths where his boots slid, her hand brushed stone like she was listening to it. He followed, awkward by comparison, feeling clumsy and green. The sun climbed, drying the desert fast. Heat shimmered off the rocks, and Jace's shirt clung to his back. He kept his eyes on Lark's movements, trying to learn. She moved low, deliberate, like the land itself taught her where to step. "Why crouch so low?" he asked after stumbling over loose gravel. "High man makes easy target," she said simply. She pointed to the ridge above. "If Flint's people follow, they watch from there. A man walking tall is first to die." Jace swallowed hard, glancing up at the cliffs. He hadn't thought of that. Truth was, he'd been riding like a parade horse through enemy country. Shame warmed his face. "Show me," he said quietly. For the first time, something shifted in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. She slowed, let him study her movements, the way she leaned her weight, the silence of her steps. He tried to mimic her, stumbling at first, until she hissed, "No, not like that. You crash like buffalo." "Guess I ain't much for sneaking," he admitted, half grinning. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile, though it died quick. "You learn, or you die. That is the rule." By midday they reached a ridge overlooking the desert floor. The storm had left pools glinting in the low ground, but the horizon stretched wide and empty. Jace shaded his eyes. In the distance, a hawk circled slow. "Trouble?" he asked. "Always," she replied. They paused beneath a scrub of mesquite for shade. Jace offered her his canteen. She eyed it, then took a careful sip. "Too much, stomach sick." "Just enough." She handed it back. Jace drank after her, realizing it was the first time they'd shared something without suspicion. The water was warm, but it tasted different. "Why help me?" she asked suddenly, voice sharp. "Why not leave me to the storm?" Jace thought a moment. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind. My father, Wade, he's a man who don't need anyone. Never told me I was enough. So I've been trying to prove it, my whole damn life. But last night, I saw you, broken, bleeding, left for dead. And I knew I couldn't walk away. Not again." Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then she rose, brushing the sand from her legs. Words are wind. Action stays. We will see if you mean it. Jace nodded, not offended. Out here, words were cheap. He'd prove it step by step, mile by mile, even if it killed him. As they pressed on, the desert stretched ahead, vast and unforgiving. Yet for the first time, Jace didn't feel entirely alone. Beside him walked a woman the world had thrown away, and somehow that made him feel less discarded himself. The storm had forced them together. Now the land itself would test whether that bond would hold. The sun was climbing high, bleaching the desert in blinding light. By noon, Jace's throat burned, his shirt clung with sweat, and every step felt heavier than the last. Still, Lark pressed on, steady and relentless, her small frame moving with more grit than he thought possible. At last they reached a dry arroyo where cottonwoods leaned in for shade. Jace slid down against the trunk, pulling his hat low to block the glare. Lark crouched a few yards away, silent, eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk. She trusted nothing. Not the land, not the silence, and certainly not him. Jace let out a dry chuckle. You plan to walk every mile like that? 'Cause if you do, we won't make it far. Her gaze flicked to him. I've walked farther with less. Maybe so, he said, tilting his hat back. But Ember can carry too. She's strong. You'll heal faster if you ride. Her lips pressed into a hard line. I ride no white man's horse. Jace studied her, tired but determined. This ain't about me being white. It's about us staying alive. He nodded toward her bandaged side. Your ribs won't hold if you keep pushing, Em. You're stubborn, but stubborn don't beat the desert. I've tried. For a moment, he thought she'd spit at him. But instead, she looked away, jaw tight, eyes lost somewhere far behind her. When Flint's people left me, they said I was cursed. Said no horse should carry me, no man should stand beside me. To ride again is to defy them. That's why I walk. Jace leaned forward, voice low, steady. Then maybe defying them is exactly what you ought to do. You're not cursed, Lark. You're breathing, fighting, still here. That sounds more like blessed to me. Silence stretched long between them. The desert wind rattled through the cottonwoods, dry leaves whispering like restless spirits. Finally, she rose and stepped toward Ember. The mare flicked her ears, nostrils flaring, but didn't shy away. Lark laid a tentative hand on the horse's neck, fingers brushing the damp coat. She does not fear me, Lark murmured. Never known Ember to judge, Jace said with a grin. Guess she's smarter than most folks. Slowly, Lark swung onto the saddle behind him. Her movements were stiff, cautious, but she held herself tall despite the pain. Jace felt the weight of her presence, the warmth of her breath close, and for the first time since the storm he didn't feel the gnaw of loneliness. As they set off, the trail wound through canyons painted red and gold by the sun. Jace kept the pace steady, careful not to jolt her ribs. The land stretched endless, cruel yet beautiful, like a canvas of fire and stone. After a while, he broke the silence. You ever think of leaving it all behind? Flint, Thorn clan, the shame they laid on you. Startin' fresh somewhere they can't touch you. She gave a bitter laugh. And where would that be? White Town spit on me. My own people threw me to the dust. Where does a woman like me belong? Jace thought of Dustwood, of Wade's cold silence, of Iris's pitying smile when he tried to court her. He thought of how even at home he'd never truly belonged. Maybe we find a place that don't care who we were, he said finally. Only who we are now. Her arms tightened slightly around his waist, just enough that he noticed. She didn't speak, but the gesture said more than words. For the first time, she let herself lean on someone else, if only a little. By sundown, the sky burned with streaks of crimson. They camped on a bluff overlooking the valley, the land rolling wide under the dying light. Lark sat close to the fire, eyes softer than he'd seen them yet. "Maybe," she said at last, voice quiet but clear, "maybe two broken ones can walk the same trail." Jace met her gaze across the flames. He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The desert had a way of making promises without words. That night, under the vast western sky, their uneasy alliance became something more, the first fragile step toward trust. The morning broke hot and clear, the desert scrub still damp from yesterday's storm. Jace saddled Ember while Lark gathered what little they had left. For the first time since meeting her, she didn't question his lead. That small shift told him more than words, she was willing to walk his trail, at least for now. They rode quietly, weaving through narrow canyons that opened into wide plains. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was steady, like the beat of Ember's hooves. Jace almost let himself believe they'd outrun the past. Almost. By late afternoon, they came upon a trading post, a lonely shack leaning against the horizon, smoke curling lazy from its chimney. Jace needed supplies. Lark, wary as ever, hung back in the shade of a mesquite tree, her eyes scanning every rider that passed. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco and old beans. The shelves were half bare, but Jace managed to find coffee, dried meat, and a box of shells. He was counting his coins when a voice drawled behind him. "Well, I'll be damned. If it ain't Wade's boy." Jace stiffened. Turning slow, he found himself face to face with Zeke, a broad-shouldered ranch hand from Dustwood with a grin meaner than a coyote's. His weathered hat sat low, eyes sharp with mockery. "Didn't think you had it in you to ride this far alone," Zeke went on. "Word is, you been seen keepin' company with an Apache woman. That true?" Jace's jaw tightened. "Not your concern." Zeke laughed, loud enough for the whole room. "Hell, I knew you were soft, Jace, but sharing a bedroll with a squaw. Wade must be proud." The room chuckled along, men nudging each other, feeding on the insult. Jace felt heat crawl up his neck, but he held his ground. "Say what you want, Zeke. Just don't say it twice." The grin faded, replaced by a cold, narrow stare. "Careful, boy. Folks back in Dustwood don't take kindly to traitors. Rusk and Nash already talkin' about ridin' out. And Eli, your own kin, he's with M. Better watch your back." Jace tossed the coins on the counter and gathered his supplies without another word. He felt eyes burning into his back as he walked out, but he didn't rise to the bait. Not here. Not yet. Outside, Lark waited, her expression unreadable. "You lingered too long," she said. Zeke was inside, Jace muttered. Word spreadin' faster than dust in the wind. "Rusk, Nash, even Eli. They'll come lookin'. Her lips pressed thin. "Your people hunt you now. Not just me." He gave a humorless laugh. "Guess we're both outlaws then." They rode on into the dusk, the sky painted in fire and blood. Every shadow stretched long, every noise in the brush set Ember's ears twitching. Jace couldn't shake the thought of Eli. His cousin had always been quick to follow louder voices, eager to prove himself. But hunting kin was a step too far. As stars broke over the desert, they made camp in a rocky hollow. Lark sat close to the flames, sharpening her knife with slow, steady strokes. Her face was calm, but her eyes glowed with the knowledge of danger closing in. "They will not stop," she said quietly. "Men like that never stop. They hunt because they fear. And fear makes men cruel." Jace stared into the fire, anger simmering deep. "Let them come. I've run long enough." The crackle of burning wood filled the silence between them. The desert was wide, but news traveled quicker than the wind. By now, Dustwood would be buzzing with talk of Wade's boy and the Apache woman. For the first time in his life, Jace knew he wasn't just fightin' for himself. He was fightin' for her too. And he'd be damned if he let Zeke or anyone else take that away. The road stretched long and merciless. For 2 days, Jace and Lark pressed on, keeping to dry washes and hidden trails, always one step ahead of riders that might be tracking them. The desert was quiet, but too quiet. Jace felt it in his bones. Zeke and the others were out there, closing the gap. By the third evening, Ember's stride grew sluggish, her flanks dust-caked and trembling. Lark moved stiffly behind Jace in the saddle, each mile grinding against her injured ribs. They needed rest, and they needed it fast. As twilight bled across the land, a warm glow flickered on the horizon, lantern light. Jace reined Ember toward it, heart wary but hopeful. Soon, a squat stone building came into view, sturdy as a fortress, with smoke curling from its chimney. Above the door, a weathered sign swung in the wind, Briggs Trading Post. Jace dismounted slow, hand brushing his colt out of habit. He knocked on the heavy wooden door. After a pause, it creaked open to reveal a broad-shouldered man with a bristling gray beard and sharp, watchful eyes. "Well now," the man said, voice gravelly but not unfriendly. "Ain't every day I see Wade's boy show up on my porch." Jace blinked in surprise. "You know my pa." "Everyone knows Wade," the man grunted. "Name's Briggs. This here's my place. Now what brings you so far out with an Apache woman riding your horse?" Behind him, a woman appeared, gentle-eyed with black hair streaked silver. She carried herself with quiet strength. "I'm Faye," she said, her voice soft yet firm. Her gaze settled on Lark, not with scorn but with concern. "She's hurt." Before Jace could answer, Lark swayed in the doorway. Faye caught her arm, guiding her inside without hesitation. Jace followed, uneasy but grateful. The interior smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Shelves lined with beans, flour, and tools filled the walls. Faye eased Lark onto a chair by the fire, her touch careful, tender. "Let me see," she said, unwrapping the bandage Jace had tied. Her brow furrowed at the angry bruises. "These ribs need rest, not more miles." Briggs watched from the hearth, arms crossed, studying Jace. "You know what kind of trouble follows a pair like you?" "I do," Jace admitted. "Zeke, Rusk, Nash, even Eli. They're comin', Dot." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "Then you brought a storm to my doorstep." Faye turned on him, her voice sharp. "And what would you have me do? Leave her to bleed in the dirt?" "You forget too fast, Briggs. Folks once said the same about me." A silence settled. Jace caught the meaning. Faye was no stranger to being judged for who she was. Briggs finally exhaled, heavy. "Fine. You'll have food, and she'll have time to heal. But mark my words, boy, Zeke won't quit easy. He's got a taste for cruelty." That night, over stew and cornbread, Jace listened as Briggs shared pieces of his past. He'd once been a lawman, tired of killing on orders that never felt like justice. When he married Faye, a Mexican woman scorned by both sides, he walked away from towns and titles to carve out this haven for misfits. Lark sat silent, but Jace noticed the way her shoulders eased. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked like she belonged somewhere, if only for a moment. When the fire burned low, Briggs poured Jace a tin cup of coffee. "You got grit, boy. But grit alone won't win. You'll need to decide soon, keep running, or make a stand." Jace glanced toward Lark, wrapped in a quilt Faye had given her, finally sleeping without fear on her face. His chest tightened. "I ain't running no more." Outside, the coyotes howled beneath a moon sharp as a blade. The desert had given them a brief shelter, but both men knew, it was only the calm before the storm. The night was thick and restless, the desert wind carrying scents of mesquite smoke and gun oil. Inside Briggs's trading post, the fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the log walls. Jace sat near the window, colt in hand, eyes sweeping the horizon beyond the lamplight. He hadn't slept a wink. Beside the hearth, Lark stirred in her blanket, knife never far from her reach. She'd healed some under Faye's care, but her body was still fragile. Even so, her spirit was iron. She insisted she would fight if the need came. It didn't take long. Just after midnight, the sound of hooves rolled in from the distance, steady, purposeful, like drums of war. Jace's grip tightened on his gun. "They're here," he muttered. Briggs rose slow, shotgun in hand. His weathered face was hard, but his voice steady. "Zeke's got a taste for blood. He won't knock polite." As if on cue, the pounding came, fists against the wooden door. A voice rang out, thick with malice. "Come on out, Jace. Don't make us drag you and that squaw out by the hair." Jace's jaw clenched, fire rising in his chest. He started for the door, but Briggs blocked him with a heavy arm. "Hold. Let's see what cards they play." Through the cracks in the shutters, torchlight flickered. Zeke, tall and broad, stood at the front, flanked by Rusk and Nash. Behind them, half a dozen men from Dustwood, restless and armed. And among them, Jace spotted a face that twisted his gut, Eli, his own kin, sitting rigid in the saddle, rifle across his lap. Faye's voice was sharp with fear as she whispered, "There are too many." Lark stood, shoulders squared despite her pain. "Numbers don't matter. Spirit does." Then she began to sing. Her voice rose in the stillness, low and haunting, carrying an Apache death song into the desert night. The sound slid under the skin, ancient and fierce, a reminder that not all battles were fought with steel. The men outside shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Zeke spat in the dirt. "Shut her up or I'll do it myself." He raised his rifle, aiming for the window. That was the spark. Briggs swung the shutters wide and fired both barrels of his shotgun. The blast thundered through the night, scattering the front line and dropping one man clean off his horse. Gunfire erupted in answer, bullets tearing into the post's walls, shattering glass and splintering wood. Jace returned fire from the doorway, each shot deliberate. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, every bullet was for Lark, for the chance to prove he was more than Wade's quiet, failed son. Inside, Faye dragged a crate across the floor, ducking low. "Ammo here," she cried, tossing cartridges toward Jace. Lark crouched beside him, knife still clutched, eyes burning with the fire of someone who refused to be broken again. The fight raged fierce. Sparks from torches lit the dry grass, flames licking dangerously close to the trading post. Men shouted, horses screamed, the night alive with chaos. Through the smoke, Jace caught sight of Eli. Their eyes met across the battlefield, cousins bound by blood, now standing on opposite sides of a line drawn in fire. For a moment, Eli faltered, lowering his rifle just enough. But Zeke shoved him forward with a curse. "Shoot, boy. Or you're no kin of ours." Eli's hands trembled. Jace held his breath, waiting for the choice that would mark them both forever. The gunfire slowed, a tense lull in the storm. Then came the silence, that dangerous kind, where decisions are made in a single heartbeat. Jace gritted his teeth, firelight painting his face in gold and blood. He knew one thing for certain, whether by bullet or blade, this night would leave no man the same. Dawn crept slow across the desert, painting the horizon in bruised purples and copper light. Smoke still hung over Briggs's post, the bitter smell of gunpowder clinging to the air. The night had been fire and fury, but somehow Jace, Lark, Briggs, and Faye still breathed. Zeke's men had scattered into the dark, some wounded, some dead, none victorious. Only Eli's face lingered in Jace's mind, the moment his cousin had lowered his rifle, torn between blood and conscience. That hesitation had given them the sliver of time they needed to survive. Briggs grunted as he patched a scrape on his arm. "You two can't linger here," he said firmly. "Zeke'll lick his wounds and come back meaner. You need a place he won't dare follow." Lark, pale but steady, nodded. My grandmother, Aura, once spoke of a hidden valley. Sacred ground. A place where the wind itself keeps watch. Briggs's eyes softened, just a little. I know it. Tucked deep in the ridges. Few white men have ever seen it. Follow the canyon north, and you'll find your road. By midday, Jace and Lark were riding again, Ember carrying them through dry washes and narrow trails. The land shifted as they went, cliffs closing in, the world growing quieter as if holding its breath. Lark sat straighter in the saddle, pain etched across her face but pride keeping her unyielding. This place, it is where my people prayed. Where vows were made that even death could not break. Jace listened, every word sinking deep. He had never been one for prayers, his father Wade raised him to believe silence was stronger than any sermon, but here, in this land carved by time and loss, he felt something stir. When they finally entered the valley, it was like stepping into another world. Green grass shimmered in the hollow, fed by a hidden spring. Cottonwoods swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets older than any town. And at the heart of it stood the prayer tree, gnarled and massive, its branches scarred with carvings left by generations long gone. Lark slid down from Ember, her legs unsteady. She touched the trunk with trembling fingers, eyes wet but fierce. This is where I bury my shame, she whispered. Where curses die. Jace dismounted too, standing beside her. He laid his palm against the bark, rough beneath his hand. Then maybe it's where I bury mine too. She turned to him, searching his face as if to test whether his words carried weight. Your people will never forgive you for choosing me. Jace gave a dry, weary laugh. Dustwood never had much use for me anyhow. I spent my life trying to earn Wade's nod. Never got it. Guess I was born for a different trail. Silence hung between them, heavy with all that had been lost. Then Lark stepped closer, so near he could feel the warmth of her breath. She sang softly, the same melody she had sung on the night of the storm, but gentler now, no longer a song of death. What's it mean? Jace asked. Her eyes shone as she answered, voice steady. It is also a marriage song. A vow before the spirits. The word struck him harder than any bullet. Jace, who had never belonged to anyone or anywhere, suddenly stood on sacred ground with a woman who bore her scars as fiercely as he bore his failures. And for the first time, belonging didn't feel like a dream, it felt real. He took her hand, rough and calloused from survival. Then let's make it ours. Here. Now. She nodded once, solemn as the earth itself. Together, they stood beneath the prayer tree, binding themselves with nothing more than words, will, and the spirits that lingered in the whispering leaves. The desert beyond still promised blood and vengeance. Zeke and his men would not stop. But inside that hidden valley, for one fleeting moment, Jace and Lark were no longer outcasts. They were something stronger, a man and woman who had chosen each other against the world. The hidden valley held its silence, the kind that feels older than time itself. Beneath the prayer tree, Jace and Lark had spoken words no lawman could witness, no preacher could bless. Yet those vows, whispered against the bark of an ancient tree, felt truer than anything either had known. For the first time since leaving Dustwood, Jace felt the weight lift from his chest. He wasn't just Wade's boy anymore. He wasn't chasing Iris's fleeting smile or his father's cold approval. He was a man who had chosen his own trail, with a woman the world had tried to erase. Lark stood beside him, her face calm but resolute. The fire in her eyes had softened into something steadier, not surrender, but trust. She touched the scarred trunk of the tree one last time, then looked at him. From this day, our shame belongs to the earth. What we carry now is only strength. He nodded, the words settling deep. Then we ride as one. They made camp near the spring, Ember grazing on the fresh grass. The night air was cool, fragrant with blooming sage. Jace sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, while Lark hummed low, her song weaving with the crackle of flames. It was no longer a death song. It was a song of living. Still, the world beyond the valley hadn't changed. Somewhere out there, Zeke was nursing his bruises, Rusk and Nash stoking the fires of vengeance. Even Eli's silence couldn't stop what was coming. The West had no shortage of men eager to crush what they couldn't understand. Jace stared into the fire. "They'll come again," he said. Lark didn't flinch. "Then we'll meet them. Here or anywhere. Together." Her words struck like steel against flint, sparking something fierce in him. For years, Jace had run from fights, from failure, from the shadow of Wade's silence. But not anymore. With Lark at his side, he wasn't afraid of being outnumbered. Briggs's words echoed in his memory, "Grit alone won't win, you'll have to decide whether to keep running, or make a stand." Jace knew his answer now. He wouldn't run. Not from Zeke, not from Dustwood, not from the ghosts of his past. The firelight painted Lark's face in gold and shadow. She reached for his hand across the flames, her grip firm, unyielding. "They took my child. They took my place among my people. But they will not take this." He squeezed her hand, his voice rough but steady. "No, they won't. Not while I still draw breath." Above them, the stars spread endless across the sky, cold and brilliant. The desert whispered in the wind, carrying the promise of blood yet to come, but also the promise of something greater, the chance to carve out a life, even in a land that hated them both. By dawn, they would ride deeper into the valley, seeking a place to build, to heal, to belong. Whether the world followed with rifles or torches didn't matter. They'd chosen each other, and that was enough. Jace watched the first light of morning spill across the cliffs. The trail ahead was rough, uncertain, and dangerous. But for the first time, he welcomed it. Because the man who had once been lost in the desert was no longer alone. He turned to Lark, his voice low, filled with something rare in the Wild West, hope. "This is our beginning." She smiled faintly, her eyes bright in the rising sun. "Yes. A beginning written in dust and blood, but ours all the same." And with that, they mounted Ember, the prayer tree standing behind them like a witness, the hidden valley stretching out before them like an unwritten story. Sparkles the end sparkles. Now I'll leave you with a question, partners. If you were in Jace's boots, would you risk the scorn of your town and the wrath of your kin for love, or would you walk away to keep the peace?